Once upon a time in a small village, there lived an old woman. She had silver hair and a face full of wrinkles, but her eyes shone with kindness. Everyone in the village loved her because she was always happy, even when life was tough. She lived alone in a small house near a big banyan tree. Her husband had passed away long ago, and she had no children to take care of her. Yet she never complained. Every morning she would sit under the banyan tree, smiling at everyone who walked by. The villagers enjoyed talking to her because her words were always warm and comforting, like a soft blanket on a cold night. The people in the village worked hard to earn a living. Some were farmers plowing their fields, some were carpenters making furniture, and others sold fruits, vegetables, and clothes in the market. But life was not always easy. Sometimes there was no rain and the crops dried up. Other times people got sick and couldn't work. Many villagers felt worried and sad. But no matter what happened, the old woman's smile never faded. One day, a young woman named Priya came to see her. Priya's face was full of tears, and her voice trembled as she spoke. "Grandma, I don't know what to do," she cried. "My husband went to the city to find work, but he hasn't sent any money. My children are hungry, and I am scared. What if something bad has happened to him?" The old woman looked at Priya with gentle eyes and smiled softly. "Sit down, my dear," she said, patting the ground beside her. "Tell me, what do you think will happen?" Priya wiped her tears with the edge of her sari. "I don't know, Grandma. I feel like everything is going wrong. What if my husband doesn't find work? What if he forgets about us? What if we have nothing to eat?" The old woman listened patiently and then shook her head gently. "Priya, when we fill our minds with bad thoughts, our hearts feel heavy and everything seems worse. But when we think good thoughts, our hearts feel lighter, and sometimes good things start to happen." Priya looked at her doubtfully. "But how can I think positive thoughts when everything around me is going wrong?" The old woman smiled again. "Let me tell you a story," she began. "Once there was a poor man who had nothing. He had no food, no money, and no family. He sat by the river one day crying. An old woman saw him and stopped. She asked, 'Why are you crying, my son?' The man said, 'I have nothing. How can I ever be happy?' The old woman smiled and said, 'You have the river that flows endlessly. You have the trees that give shade and fruit. You have the sun that warms you every day. Look around you. There is beauty and life everywhere. If you only think about what you don't have, you will always be sad. But if you think about what you do have, you will find peace.'" The man listened carefully. He stopped crying and started noticing the river, the trees, and the bright sun. Slowly, he began to feel better. From that day, he worked hard, and his life started to change. The old woman looked at Priya and said, "You see, my dear, the man's life didn't change by magic. It changed because he changed the way he thought. When we think positively, we find the strength to face our problems. But if we only focus on our worries, we feel weak and hopeless." Priya listened carefully and then asked, "Will my thoughts really make a difference?" The old woman nodded. "Yes, my child. If you wake up every morning and say, 'Today will be a good day,' you will find the strength to care for your children and face whatever comes your way. But if you keep thinking about what might go wrong, you will feel sad and unable to act." Priya wiped her tears and nodded slowly. "I understand, Grandma. I will try to think good thoughts from now on." The old woman smiled warmly. "That is the first step, my dear." From that day on, Priya followed the old woman's advice. Every morning she told herself, "Today will be a good day." She worked hard, took care of her children, and waited for her husband with hope in her heart. A few weeks later, she received a letter from him. He had found a job in the city and was sending money back home. Priya's eyes filled with tears of joy. She ran to the old woman's house to share the good news. The old woman smiled and said, "You see, my dear, when we think positively, we invite good things into our lives. Problems will always come, but if we face them with a hopeful heart, we can overcome them." Soon the old woman's wisdom spread across the village. Many people came to her to share their worries, and she always gave the same advice. Think good thoughts, and good things will follow. The villagers began to see the power of her words, and their lives slowly became brighter. They loved and respected her even more for the hope and happiness she brought into their lives. Our thoughts have great power over our lives. When we focus on the good, we find strength, hope, and solutions to our problems.